Hi, good evening, and welcome to the Gender Speaker live show on this Sunday evening, where it's my LGBTQ history show. So today we're going to be talking about transvestism, cross-dressing, and where that all came from, and looking back a little bit into the history from the 18th century when it all started. Actually, I say it all started. It didn't, but one particular person became particularly famous in the 18th century, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So, transvestism and cross-dressing, and to some extent, that was prompted because I saw an interesting post on Facebook. I think it's been all over the place at the moment of a gentleman, a man who likes to wear skirts and doesn't in any way identify as trans and doesn't try to put himself across as as transgender. He just likes to wear skirts and high-heeled shoes, and to be perfectly honest, looks extraordinarily good in them. Wears them extremely well. It's not the first time I've seen this. I've seen somebody else quite a few years back who posted quite a lot about cross-dressing and about the fact that he liked to wear dresses. And I had an American friend who may even watch this show from time to time, Cameron Boku, he's from the Congo, now lives in Canada. But he used to wear fabulously colourful clothing. Didn't particularly go down extraordinarily well with a lot of his African friends, but I got on with him extremely well. Loved the fact that he dressed in these clothes, and I remember a little debate with him one day over. I said, "I really love your skirt." He said, "It's a kilt." I said, "Kamaboka, it's really, really short, and you're wearing tights. That's a skirt, but it doesn't matter. Why shouldn't men wear those clothes?" Back in 1969, a long time ago, I know this is the problem when I'm looking at history about this. I was in that history, so this is part of the problem. But back in 1969, when I first started work, women were occasionally sent home for wearing trousers. Can you imagine that now, today, if somebody sent a woman home for wearing trousers to work? But there was a sense that, the right attire for a woman at work was a dress or a skirt, and that they shouldn't be wearing trousers. If you go back another 100 years, you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, quite clear then women did not wear trousers. That sort of started with the Second World War, where women had to work on the land, had to work in factories, wore male overalls because that was the safest thing to wear. And after the Second World War, there was a reluctance to go back. It's going to be interesting to see what happens after COVID. When you've had, I don't know, people think it's all going to be over next year. I don't. I think we're going to be seeing pretty much restrictions on and off pretty much through next year. In the speaking industry, we're generally thinking that we are not going to see much in the way of new meetings or outdoor meetings until, I guess 2022. But if you get a couple of years of new changes to the way in which you work, very, very difficult to see that ever totally changing back. And there will be attempts to. But anyway, so let's get on with this. So we're looking at the man who first invented the term transvestite was Magnus Hirschfeld. Actually, that was not the term. It was a German term, but I meant to look it up, but didn't. But the term transvestite came out of Hirschfeld's book written in 1910. And that was a term used to describe all people who dressed in clothing of the opposite gender. And this would have been at the time when that term was equally applied to women as it was to men. So, the women who came to the clubs in Berlin dressed in very masculine clothes, or definitely dressed as men, would have been called transvestites, just as the men who dressed as women. And the person I want to go back to that really is quite an important key figure is a Frenchman. His name is the Chevalier de Beaumont. I'll bring up my slide here just so we can have a look at him, because I've been fascinated by his what happened to the Chevalier, and I think you'll find you'll be quite fascinated as well. So, oops, lost my actual access to the slide for a moment. There we go. So, the Chevalier d'Eon de Beaumont, born in 1728, lived till 1810. Now, this was a really tumultuous period of history. Huge amount happened. And it's one of those things where big events in history all happen that we all know about and talk about. And very often we don't realize that they all happened at the same time. Because during this period, 1777, the American War of Independence. Shortly after that, the French Revolution took place and the storming of the Bastille. It was 1815 when we start to see, it was just after there was the Napoleonic Wars had started there. The William Wilberforce, I live in Hull, William Wilberforce, our famous MP, who finally brought about the end of slave trading. And there was the battles of the 7-year war between the French and the English, in fact, ongoing battles and war between the French and the English throughout this period of time. And this is really significant. So a very, really tumultuous period of history. And during this time, Louis XV created he had a public policy on international relations, foreign policy, but he also had a secret policy, and that was to employ people who were under pain of death to keep secret that they were working for him and his secret plots and plans, secret plots involving Russia and then subsequently Britain. So he appointed the Chevalier, not a Chevalier then, but he appointed d'Eon de Beaumont as a secret aide. He went there as a secretary to the ambassador, although the ambassador wasn't actually there, so he actually took the role of the ambassador in Russia. But actually his role was to get close to Empress Elizabeth. And the British were stopping anybody getting into Russia at the time, particularly from France, and only allowing women and children in. So the Chevalier posed easily as a woman and kept that up. And very often did a lot of this secret spying as a woman in Russia. And it's a strange thing that men are more likely to not be cautious when there are women around, thinking that women won't understand the deep politics that men talk about. Well, of course they do. Matahari, there are quite a lot of examples of women who've, Christine Keeler. And these are people who do hear what's going on, and men blab when there are women about. But anyway, that's what happens. The Chevalier was there, and he was there for most of that period of the 7-year war during 1756 to 1763. Finally recalled from Russia. And the war with Britain, the 7-year war, which had been a global conflict, because this was a time when Britain, most of the European countries were establishing colonies in Africa and America. Remember, at this stage, Canada and America were both British colonies, but the French were, battling a lot along in terms of that. And at the end of this 7-year war, France lost most of its colonies. Britain grabbed quite a lot of those. And the Chevalier was sent to Britain to basically sign up and get the details of the peace treaty in place. And the French weren't very happy about what had happened. They pretty much lost. And so the secret role was to try and find out more about what was going on and to help Louis prepare for an invasion of Britain, one which actually never happened. So all of this, was going on all the time. And just to sort of put some sense into this, along the period, the French fell out with the Chevalier for things he was doing and wanted to recall him back to France, and he refused and blackmailed the French government because he had some documents. So he wrote a book, scared the life out of everybody, looked like he was going to release all the secrets. He didn't. He used this to manipulate and manage getting a pension. And all of this time, he was living partly as a woman, partly as a man. Then in 1777, actually they had a court case in which it was defined that he definitely was a woman. She was a woman. So she returned to France, where she was required to live as a woman, and even frog marched back home on one occasion when she arrived at court dressed as a French dragoon in order to be dressed as a woman. And apparently the maid was instructed to tie the corset so tightly that it was actually difficult, or if not impossible, for the Chevalier to get out of the female wear. An interesting battle, constantly in debt, all sorts of problems, ended up in debtor's prison for a while, in exile for a while, finally died in almost poverty in Britain in 1810. What was interesting is I found this picture of the Chevalier wearing a Masonic apron and Masonic jewel, which would have implied, looking at it, that the Chevalier was also a master or past master of a Freemasons lodge. I know that because I have similar gear myself from time when I was a Freemason. Actually, I still am a Freemason, but I've become inactive, although the Freemasons have now said I'm welcome back, which is interesting. So there's some interest about that. Now, the important thing about Chevalier is that Havelock Ellis, when he was beginning to do his work at the same time as Magnus Hirschfeld in the 1900s, he wanted to use Eon, as from Dion, as a term to describe transvestism. This was working along with the same use of the Marquis de Sade for masochism and the sadism. I can't remember the Marquis de Sade for sadism, and other noblemen would be there. Noblemen who practice certain sexual practices, their names were being used as the term to describe them. So that's the story of the Chevalier de Beaumont. Now, I'm going to come back to the Beaumont Society in a minute, because the Beaumont Society became the name used then for the Society for essentially cross-dressers in the United Kingdom. But before we do that, I want to talk briefly about the origins of that, and that's Virginia Prince. Virginia Prince, born 1912 to 2009. I actually met Virginia Prince in the 1980s. I didn't realize it was her. I'd met this person. Virginia sometimes traveled as Charles, sometimes as Virginia. Had been a heterosexual cross-dresser, married for the early part of her life. Had set up a society, a secret society, very, very secret. Nobody was supposed to know about it. Because there was a problem in the 1960s, especially in America. If you were cross-dressing, there was an immediate assumption that you were gay, that you were cross-dressing in order to hide the fact you were gay. And we've seen, and I've talked about the Molly houses in the 1700s, in the early 1700s, which were constantly targeted because they were mostly gay men dressing as women in order to hide the fact that they were men, so that gay people could, effectively move about without being instantly spotted. So for transvestites, for men who like to dress as women, there was a constant fear of ridicule, constant fear of being arrested, perhaps charged with importuning, the belief that if a man dressed as a woman was talking to a woman, they were trying to, importune, they were trying to basically pull women without women realizing that was what was happening. It wasn't the case. Most of these were men happily married, but they loved to cross-dress. The reality is quite a lot would have changed gender, were actually transsexual. They would have wanted to actually have their body changed, but they have children, they had good jobs. And this is at a time when you could get sacked straight away if someone found out you were cross-dressing. And in fact, there are lots of court cases where people have tried to defend that even just telling somebody you cross-dress was enough to get you sacked from a job working for a local authority. So this society was set up, a secret society, with chapters all over the place where people could meet, heterosexual cross-dressers, and Virginia Prince popularized the term transgender. It had been first, used in a medical document in about 1961, but by 1969, Virginia Prince liked the term because she said, I'm not, at the end of the 60s, she basically decided she was going to live full-time as a woman. And she said, I'm not a transvestite. I'm not just dressing from time to time. This is who I am. But I'm not transsexual because I don't want to completely change my gender. I don't want to physically have surgery and use hormones. I just want to present this way. And this is, you can see the picture of Virginia there. So she said, I do like the term transgender or transgenderist, I think was actually what she said. And she used that term in the Transvestia magazine and various other things. Now, in the United Kingdom and Europe, there were also obviously transvestites around, cross-dressers, who wanted to meet up with each other. And so they decided, having seen the magazines, that they would form chapters over here. And in 1965, the first of the UK and Europe chapters were formed very secretly. People meeting in Southampton, I think, was where it first started in the UK. And eventually that became the Beaumont Society, taking the name of the Chevalier de Beaumont to create a society that was essentially there for heterosexual cross-dress, so men could go out somewhere where they could safely go, usually to somebody else's house or to a venue that they knew was safe, where they could then often, I went to some of the meetings myself and would go along and take my clothes with me, go and get changed if they had a changing room there. So we could actually meet, have a drink. There were a few small clubs around that existed where quite literally we could just go and sit and enjoy a night out with a few people, have a chat, talk about various different, somewhere we could talk about makeup, talk about clothes, talk about things that women talk about, but we weren't able to because we were men. And that was the Beaumont Society. And it was exactly what, was created in America, that same sense. Now, it got a slightly bad reputation. It's overcome that now. Today, the Beaumont Society supports all people underneath the trans umbrella. And it's encouraging more young people in, because it had acquired a bit of a reputation for both basically middle-aged men who want to cross-dress. It's a lot more orientated around all elements of trans, with lots of support and help for people who are actually undergoing gender reassignment, undergoing medical treatment. So that's some sense of the background of where they're on. It's very difficult to put across to people just how difficult and traumatizing this was. I remember growing up frightened to go anywhere. And I remember I once, there was a club in Manchester, just part of the gay village in Manchester. And I remember being there. I'd been on a work event, doing a workshop, doing a workshop. And I stopped in a hotel, quietly sort of sneaked out, got myself changed and sneaked out so that nobody saw me. But I got to the Northern Concord Centre, and it was they had these two big burly bouncers on the door, and this scared the life out of me. I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I walked up the street and back down the street. I spent about half an hour walking up and down the street, terrified to actually go in, because the moment I went in, it was definitely outing myself. I went back some months later and did overcome my fears. But I think it's difficult for people to understand just how terrifying and fearful it is, because back before 2000, if you were caught cross-dressed, there was a chance you'd end up in the press. There was a chance you'd lose your job. There was a certain chance that it would wreck marriages, wreck families. And that was why these societies had to be so secret. So the Beaumont Society formed in 1965, as I say, as the UK chapter. And it wasn't just for cross-dressers. The Beaumont Society has always encouraged wives to come along as well, because general sense that, this isn't something to be afraid of. And there was a lot of, they produced publications to go to wives to say, look, if your husband's a cross-dresser, don't worry. It's just a love of wearing those clothes. And, why not just treat it as a night out with a girlfriend for one night and then that's it? And I know a lot of women who actually found that they could cope with that quite well. They went out for a night out once a month or once a week with their husbands, had a girls' night out, and that was it. Nobody else knew. It was kept quiet. And a lot of help and support was put there to help people to cope with that. Today, the term transvestite's gone out of fashion completely. If you look in the dictionary, you'll find that in both the Cambridge and Oxford dictionaries, the word transvestite implies or is overtly shown to have some kind of sexual context. The sense is that transvestites wear those clothes for sexual gratification. That's not the case at all. I'm not saying that nobody does that. We've used the term transvestite sort of started using crossdresser, but I think most people see the terms of crossdresser and transvestite as applying to mostly older people. So the sense has all gone now towards using transgender. Virginia Prince's, the term Virginia Prince popularized has become the umbrella term. And even that's causing some confusion. I'm going to look at that a little bit more as well, because I think people who are coming out as non-binary saying, well, I'm not really transgender. I'm not trying to change from one gender to another. I'm actually staying in the middle. So I'm seeing terms like gender incongruence coming out more and more. But the problem is everybody's got new terms. And so we've got, 100. I've lost count of how many terms there are now. But certainly transvestite is now not a term to use. It's a term that people consider to be a bit derogatory. It implies a whole sense of things. And if you look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Society, that hasn't helped because they have created a new mental health condition which is called transvestic fetishism, which is the sense of somebody wearing clothes for sexual gratification for fetishistic reasons. And there are some people for whom that's inappropriate, and it is an appropriate term to describe certain types of cross-dressing, people who like to dress in, shall we say, more BDSM type wear, or baby girl wear, or various different fetishistic dressing, and that it does exist. But for most people who are transgender, it's actually an uncomfortable feeling, uncomfortable sense of being the gender they were assigned at birth. So that's it for tonight. I'm going to be putting all of these eventually ending up now on a YouTube. You can find them on my YouTube channel. This is going straight to YouTube. You'll also be able to find them on my podcast, which I'm publishing on genderspeaker.com, but you'll find the Gender Speaker podcast on your normal podcast app. If you just look up Gender Speaker live, it'll come in. I shall be back in on Wednesday, 21st, interviews and chats on gender issues. I'm actually interviewing a fellow member of the Professional Speaking Association, Marina Roberts, who has done quite a bit of work with issues around gender and gender stereotypes. So I'm interested in that. This isn't just about transgender issues on this show. I want to be looking at issues of gender, full stop. So join me on Wednesday when we will be moving on to that. I've lost, where have I put my... No. There we go. Sorry. Just lost where I was for a second there. Wouldn't it be great to have a whole team of producers around doing all the clicks and buttons and various other things? So there we are. Thank you for being with me, and I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday when we'll be looking more at gender issues. Thanks so much.